Morning, government class. Wanted to start off by wishing Nolan a happy birthday tomorrow. If I can remember Friday when we get on Zoom, we'll sing to you, Nolan. But anyway, happy birthday. We've been talking a little bit this week about how government affects the economy and how it can promote economic growth. Um, Important thing about that to remember is that for most of the country's existence, the federal government really didn't have that much to do with the economy. It was really only after the turn of the 20th century that we had a fair amount of government involvement in the economic life of the country's citizens and the country as a whole. And so the main thrust of what we're going to be talking about today and tomorrow is globalization and worldwide economic interdependence between nations. But in order to get to that, we need to kind of lay a foundation for our understanding of the United States economy and how the government affects that, what structures it has in place to affect the national economy. And again, that's particularly important to understand right now as we head into a recession and possibly worse because of the COVID 19 pandemic. So, talking about the domestic economy, for the first 120 years or so of its existence, the federal government played only a limited role in the economy and in the economic well being of the American people. However, by the early 20th century, due to repeated economic panics and recessions culminating in the Great Depression of the 1930s, the amount of governmental involvement began to change. A vital free enterprise system fosters competition and entrepreneurship. The federal government tries to support this system by attempting to ensure fairness in the marketplace, and with it, the health and well being of both consumers and workers. Okay, so attempting to ensure fairness in the marketplace, when you hear people talk about regulations, oh, the government's got too many regulations, too many restrictions on business, that's what they're talking about. That's how government attempts to enforce fairness and promote fairness within the workplace is through regulations saying, okay, a company cannot do this or has to do this, and that's how the government promotes fairness. So a lot of times when we have these big movements, oh, get big government off our backs, let the businesses, let the free hand of the market take care of things. The resulting kind of government that we would get from a lack of regulation is very unfair, and an economic system that tends to pollute, tends to be, treat minorities and women much more unfairly than it does or would do under a well-regulated capitalist system. Recall, there are a number of independent agencies within the executive branch of the government. Many of them have an important role in the regulation of economic activities within the United States. Among the most important of them are the Federal Reserve System, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and such organizations as the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the Department of Labor. Okay, Federal Reserve System. And remember, guys, you don't need to be taking notes on this right now. I will upload or have Mr. Schmidt upload all the completed notes for this later today. Federal Reserve System. Known as the Fed, the Federal Reserve System is one of the most powerful tools in the federal government that the federal government uses to regulate the nation's economy. The Fed was established by Congress in 1913 to become the central banking system for the United States. It consists of a board of governors appointed by the president, one of whom is appointed to act as the chairperson, 12 regional banks, and many other member banks. The main purpose of the Fed is to use the tools of monetary policy to promote price stability, full employment, economic growth, and other national economic goals. Mainly, this means adjusting the federal funds rate, an interest rate at which banks lend money to other banks on a daily basis. The Fed does this to either contract or expand the amount of money in the economy in response to changes in inflation or unemployment. Raising interest rates makes money more expensive to borrow, and so, in theory, contracts the economy or makes the economy smaller. Lowering interest rates makes money less expensive to borrow, and so tends to expand the economy. The rate adjustments that the Fed makes can affect other lending rates, foreign exchange rates, and the levels of money and credit available in the economy, as well as employment and prices. So when the coronavirus pandemic really first started to take hold about a month or month and a half ago, the Federal Reserve here in the United States lowered interest rates almost to 0%, which makes money, as cheap as it can be to borrow, in the hopes of spurring more economic growth, so that not as many people were laid off and unemployed during this crisis. In 2008 on into 2009, which was the previous period of economic downturn when you guys were small children, I guess, the Fed took several actions to avert a panic in the financial markets. You can read more about the importance of the Fed in Chapter 16. Okay, then the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission is a federal regulatory agency consisting of 5 commissioners appointed by the president, who also selects the SEC's chairperson from among those 5 commissioners. Congress created the SEC in 1934 in the aftermath of the stock market crash that contributed to the Great Depression. So the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission, is there to make sure that people who are buying and selling stocks on Wall Street play by the rules. One of the things that you're not supposed to do if you are trading stocks on Wall Street is what's called insider trading. And insider trading just means that if you are good buddies with the head of X company, some huge company, and you own millions of dollars worth of stocks in this company, and the CEO or the president of this company is your best friend. If that best friend comes to you and says, "Hey, we're about to announce that we're closing some plants. We're going to make that announcement next week. We expect that that's going to make the price of our stocks drop, but we're not announcing it until next week. So if you have all these stocks in my company, get rid of them now so you don't lose all that money." If you then go and do that, sell off those stocks before the general public has knowledge that this company is going to be closing plants, that's what's called insider trading. If you know something that the rest of the country doesn't, and you take action to save yourself money or to make money in a way that's not available to the rest of the country, that's insider trading, and it's illegal, and you can wind up being prosecuted by the SEC. Okay, the Commission's central task is to oversee the nation's stock markets and ensure that corporations do not engage in such abuses as insider trading, which is the practice of buying or selling stock based on company information not known to other investors. The SEC also ensures that publicly traded companies truthfully disclose their finances. In other words, if you are the CEO or president of X company, and you know that your company is getting ready to close, a number of plants in the coming weeks or months, or you know that your company is having cash flow problems, you have to be honest about it. You can't report false earnings numbers in order to try to keep the value of your stocks high, because that, again, would also be prosecuted by the SEC. It brings court actions against those who violate security laws, for example, through insider trading, fraudulent accounting practices, or providing false information to investors. And finally, the Department of Labor. The federal government provides protections for the basic rights of workers and oversees issues of fairness and safety in the workplace. Much of this is accomplished by the Department of Labor. To meet these aims, the department works through its various agencies. For example, since the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, was established in 1971, its inspectors have worked with employers and employees to decrease deaths in the workplace by 60%. If you have a job, those of you who, ninth graders, you guys probably aren't working yet, but as you get a little bit older, start getting your first jobs, you're going to be under the protection of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that keeps things from, say, if you work in a kitchen as a dishwasher or something like that. Commercial dishwashers heat water up to an extremely hot temperature in order to get dishes clean. Uh, Without OSHA, those commercial dishwashers could be maintained and run in such a way that it would be a scalding risk for the people who are doing the dishwashing for a restaurant. OSHA's regulations, for example, would keep that from happening, would keep restaurants from putting dishwashers and other workers at risk. The Employment Standards Administration monitors fairness in contracts, benefits, and wages. The Bureau of Labor Statistics plays the important role of tracking major economic statistics such as the unemployment rate, and the Consumer Price Index. These data are used to evaluate the health of the nation's economy. Okay, that kind of gives you an overall look at how the government views the domestic economy. But really, since the 70s and then really accelerating in the 1990s, the economy has gone global. Okay, this is called globalization. The American economy isn't so much just this kind of discrete by itself thing anymore. It's part of an overall world economy that kind of sinks or swims as one. So if something happens to the Chinese economy, that's going to have effects here. It's going to have effects in Europe. If something happens to our economy in the United States, that's going to have effects in Asia and in Africa, because it's all interrelated. And one of the ways that we've seen that recently, particularly with the COVID-19 outbreak, is that because of the way globalization happens, when the pandemic hit China first and really shut down big parts of the Chinese economy, a lot of the things that we sell or that we buy in this country are made in China. And with their economy shut down and all, quarantines going on throughout China, those materials weren't getting made, or if they were made, they weren't getting shipped. And so that immediately began to have a ripple effect here and in Europe and around the world. This is one of the risks of globalization. Globalization comes with a lot of upsides, but it also comes with risks, and that kind of globalized supply chain is one of them. Kind of like with Hurricane Maria 3 years ago, when it hit Puerto Rico and took out really the majority of the Puerto Rican infrastructure. Puerto Rico, turns out, is the source for most of the saline that is used in American hospitals. And saline, if you ever see anyone on an IV drip, got the needle in their arm and the tube that goes up to the bag. That bag is full of what's called saline. It's basically salt water. Not just salt water, but it's medical grade salt water that's used to thin out medicines and to provide medicines into your veins. When Hurricane Maria destroyed basically the manufacturing capacity of Puerto Rico, that was the United States' primary source, almost really its only source, for those bags of saline. And after the hurricane, American hospitals had a huge shortage of bags of saline. That's a problem because those are needed. Those are everyday use things in hospital settings for all sorts of conditions. So we'll talk more tomorrow and into next week about the global economy, how that all works with individual nations and whatnot. Again, happy birthday, Nolan, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Oh, again, don't worry about taking notes on all this. I'll have Mr. Schmidt upload the complete notes here in just a little bit. Bye, guys.